This podcast of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, is sponsored by AAA Heating and Air.
The premier HVAC company in the Midlands is growing. Are you a top HVAC technician?
AAA Heating and Air is looking for dedicated applicants to fill their fast-growing service department with top-notch HVAC technicians.
If you're the best, then they want you. If you're ready to stop working and start a career, you can earn up to $100,000 plus a year at AAA Heating and Air.
Quality candidates will have at least 2 years experience and a good driving record. Benefits include top industry salaries, commission on service and unit sales, set call limits, company-provided take-home vehicle and gas card, company-provided cell phone and tablet, health, dental, and vision benefits, 401k retirement plan with company match, and scaled PTO based on length of service.
Contact Roy and Dana Finley at 803-677-1500 or check out their job postings on Facebook or ZipRecruiter.
AAA Air when you need us. AAA Heating and Air.
11 o'clock on your Tuesday morning. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Tyler West and Chris along with you. Thanks you once again to Spencer Rattler for being today's guest on the Garnet Trust Hour. Chris, very good conversation that you had with Rattler. Fourth time, I think, that he's been a part of either that show or this show. So thank you to Spencer for being so gracious with his time. A lot of good stuff that you guys hit on in that hour. Anything in particular that stood out to you, Chris? One major takeaway from that?
Yeah, the host was terrible, but Spencer did a good job as always. And here's the thing that actually stood out the most to me, Tyler, and it really wasn't anything on-field, schematic, anything like that. It was toward the end where I asked Spencer to kind of look back on his decision to come to South Carolina, to stay, not just for 1 year, but 2 years. And I was actually thinking over the weekend when I saw some of the guys down on the field and Steve Spurrier down on the field from that 2010 to 2013 era, those guys getting honored, coming back. We've obviously seen, Jadeveon Clowney come back when he got his number retired. When he Alshon Jeffrey, same deal. He was back earlier this season. So it got me thinking, like, hey, how is Spencer Rattler, going to be viewed here at South Carolina with the things that he's done? He's only been here 2 years. It's been a short stay. It's been a little bit longer than we thought, but a shorter stay. And so the thing that stood out the most to me is just asking him about this place and his thoughts on it. And I think he really, truly views it as a home. He called it a home away from home, said he's keeping his place here, so when he moves on to the NFL, he played, obviously, at Oklahoma. He's from Arizona, but he's played his college ball here at South Carolina, and he seems to view it as more than just, a place he stopped over. He's going to keep his place here so that when he comes back, he'll have a place to stay. He said he'll always be back. So I think we'll be in years in the future. Maybe Spencer Rattler is jumping out of the back of the cockaboose train that comes on the field before the game and leading the Gamecocks chant. But I thought that was pretty cool to hear, and that stood out to me.
Well, and from looking at the history of South Carolina quarterbacks, well, obviously the success overall is not going to be what we certainly hoped for Spencer Rattler, and there's still the opportunity to get to 6-6 and go to a bowl game from like a skill standpoint and what he brings to the table as a quarterback. I mean, if he's not the best ever, he's certainly up there in the conversation.
Yeah, he's easily in the conversation. I actually would make the argument sitting right here, right now, that he's the best quarterback, at least of the eras that I've seen. I want to be completely not hot take-ish with it. Like, I know sometimes, he's the best that's ever played here, and we didn't see them all. But as far as the guys I've seen, and that is at this point watching some Carolina football for a long time, I do think he's the best, and he's even avoided the sort of fan base gives up on you trajectory that almost all quarterbacks have. Every single quarterback, unless and even if you're like an NFL Hall of Famer that's been at an NFL franchise for 12 years, eventually most who've ever played the game have to deal with game's passed him by. It's time for him. I love what he's done, but time for him to retire. So pretty much every quarterback goes through this trajectory where everybody's pumped up for you. You can do no wrong because they haven't seen you make a mistake yet. And then depending on how good you are, it sort of climbs from there. And at some point, you go down the other side of this curve, and it's people have given up on you. And for Rattler, luckily he started slow, but he's finished on a very, very strong note. So I think people have seen what he's done, and they're looking at this team this year, and they're seeing, man, he's out there taking a beating. He's never once blamed his teammates, never once blamed the defense, never once blamed the offensive line, and I think that goes a long way with people.
And obviously I wasn't working here through most of last season, so I wasn't as plugged into what the conversation around Rattler was through those first 10 games of the year. What was kind of the perception before everything kind of exploded in those last 2 games last year? Because he wasn't playing to the standard that I think a lot of people thought he was going to, and the team as a whole wasn't. But it seemed like a lot of people were like, okay, well, he is what he is. Those days at Oklahoma are in the past, and, we'll see what we can get out of him here. But what was the conversation around Spencer Rattler during that time last year where him and the team as a whole were struggling a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Chris, I don't know what you remember, but I think for the most part, early on, it was, he's still got to get settled in. So there was a little grace period there. A lot of the negativity at the time was more directed at the offense coordinator, Mark Satterfield. So that there's a little bit of buffer there in that, hey, you have this guy. Are you using him correctly? I feel like was a lot of the conversation. Now, there was a point, depending on, everybody's going to have differing opinions. I would say towards the middle of the season, there was kind of some things where you're like, well, Rattler has settled into being, he almost became a little bit of a game manager. And remember they were saying it was get the ball to Marshawn Lloyd. That was the game plan for the middle portion of the season. And so it kind of shifted a little bit away from, it wasn't that Rattler was playing poorly, but it was more just that he was being asked to be a different quarterback than what we're seeing him be right now and what we saw him be at the end of last year. And then, of course, you just had the offensive explosion against Tennessee, and it skyrocketed from there. But I would say in the middle of the season, everybody kind of adjusted their expectations a little bit, and the offense shifted more towards run first, run second, and it just kind of is what it is. But I don't really get the sense there was ever a time when the fan base just kind of turned on him and said, oh, he's not the best guy for the job.
Yeah, you did have I do remember there was one kind of infamous call last year where and it probably represented it, maybe just one person. It might have represented like 5% of the fan base, and I want to say it was probably after the Florida game where absolutely like nobody played well. They had the special teams touchdown, and that was it. And there were a few calls then of, well, we got to get, Luke Doty in there or whoever. And there was a little bit of that. Of course, that was very quickly wiped out, the next week. But it is fascinating, I think, what you said, Wes, and I haven't really thought about that until you said it, that he did. I mean, you think about some of the best players, and especially just zooming into the quarterback position, they have all been victim of that, right? I mean, Dylan Thompson threw for, 1 million yards one year, and it was a constant, the offense kind of had to score every time in 2014. And Dylan Thompson, we saw a lot of that. Connor Shaw, who for most people is their number one and has been their number one, whether it's in the modern era or even all time. I remember several occasions where people wanted Connor Shaw benched, right? It's quarterback. That's the way it is. Backup quarterbacks are always fascinating.
He's the most popular guy on the team.
And I think Spencer Rattler has some of his past has helped to color, and when I mean past, like the positive aspects of it. Hey, former number one quarterback all time, 5-star guy, super talented, at one time on a bunch of Heisman lists at Oklahoma.
Apparently also held the Arizona State high school passing record until recently.
He did,
we
until it was broken, which I didn't know. He seemed mildly like almost a little bit disappointed about that, maybe.
That it got broken?
It got broken.
I thought for a minute y'all were saying the basketball passing record.
He may hold some of those records too.
I'm not going to make any passing references.
See, that's
anymore.
what I was about to say. I thought he was not. He's not a pass first guy, Chris.
Did win a state title though.
Yes.
But
Hey, I've said his basketball mixtape, very sweet.
It's legit. But no, I mean he did kind of avoid that, and it's just it's fascinating. It's going to be fascinating to see how people look back, on his tenure at South Carolina. And it's kind of a shame that Xavier Leggette's having the season he has. Rattler's conducted himself how he has, played how he has, and the results haven't been there.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part it's going to be widely positive.
Yeah.
Now it would be trying to think of my word here. If it could include another win over Clemson, then I do think there would be even more sort of positive memories just about how it went on the field for the team as well, even with the disappointment of this season. But I think in terms of Rattler as a player himself and as a quarterback and the notoriety that he brought to this program and just the fact that he chose South Carolina and came in and I think really frankly, guys, the difference I've seen from him this year is he feels like he's a Gamecock now. Like it felt like last year this was a one-year transfer. I'm going to go do my job, and then I'm going to go to the NFL. And now it feels like he is looked at – right now I look at Rattler as being a South Carolina quarterback as opposed to a former Oklahoma quarterback who transferred to South Carolina.
And that's an interesting point that you bring up because there are plenty of guys that just go to a school for a year or two. Hey, I'm here to play football and, take my aspirations to the next level, whatever it may be. And I think back to like when Joe Burrow went to LSU, and obviously that was a team that ended up being one of the greatest teams in all of college football history, winning the national championship and everything like that. But he embraced the community in Baton Rouge and will forever be loved, not only for his play on the field, but who he was to that program, that community as a whole. And I see similarities. And again, the success on the field wasn't nearly the same here, but I see a lot of similarities between how much Rattler has embraced just being a part of this community in Columbia, as Chris mentioned, wanting to keep his house here, even when he goes on to the NFL, wanting to be around this program years down the line, be honored at, games 10, 15 years from now, whatever it may be. Like he has fully embraced being a Gamecock and being a part of this community here in Columbia, which I think is great.
And I think people who sat in the stadium and watched them beat Tennessee or who watched on TV or were there at Clemson, those are memories, despite this season, those are memories people will never forget, I think. And you can sit there and say, without a shadow of a doubt, those don't happen without Seven running the show for you at QB. And guys, amazingly enough, even with just 2 seasons, he is climbing the South Carolina career passers list very quickly. He's busted into the top 10 already. He's not going to pass Todd Ellis, who's still number 1, but he's moving up this list. He's moving up the season list as well, and maybe I'll give those here in a minute. But he even just in 2 seasons, he's kind of etched his name into the record books.
Absolutely, and still more games to play, and obviously, hopefully, get these next 3 wins and get to a bowl game as well, so he can have a proper send-off to his career here in South Carolina. Oh, can you talk a little bit more about what Rattler had to say, as well as putting a bow on the Jacksonville State game before we move on to Vanderbilt this upcoming weekend? That's coming up. It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on a Tuesday morning here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Tyler West and Chris along with you on this Tuesday morning. Get back into our conversation about Spencer Rattler in just a second. But it is Veterans Day this upcoming Saturday, and all this week we're inviting you to celebrate a veteran in your life by telling us a story of them on our website, 1075thegame.com, and filling out the contest form. We will read 1 per show on Friday and then have a drawing to win or pair tickets to South Carolina and Clemson coming up at the end of the season. That winner will be picked in the 5 o'clock hour coming up on Friday, again, Veterans Day, this Saturday, November the 11th. Speaking of tickets as well, keep it locked right here on the game all week long, as we'll be giving away tickets to men and women's basketball games, as well as some upcoming football tickets. Also, Hootie and the Blowfish going to be in town August the 29th next year, playing the Carolina Coliseum, and we'll have some tickets to give away for that as well. Those football tickets sponsored by Carolina Honda Powerhouse. Speaking of Hootie and the Blowfish, did y'all know that Darius Rucker was at the stadium on Saturday?
I did.
Yeah,
He's at most of the games, I think.
I that was the first time I had seen him. I don't get starstruck really often, but when you turn around after I saw Steve Spurrier first, he was talking to our friend Rick Henry from WIS down the street, and I kind of turned and I was like, "Holy crap, that's Steve Spurrier!" And then 2 minutes later, Darius Rucker's walking down the hallway. I'm like, "Wow,
The
that's pretty
stars
cool."
were out.
I know. I never get like starstruck, but I'm like, that's pretty dang cool.
Who were you more starstruck for?
It's definitely Spurrier, just
Yeah.
because like I was not expecting, and I knew he was going to be there, obviously, but I didn't think he was going to be standing 2 feet away from me. So the old ball coach.
The one and only. Did you speak to him?
I did not. I was going
Did you have
to.
your Georgia hat on?
I did not. No, I was in the press box. I'm a professional. I was going to attempt to, but after he talked to Rick, he ended up walking away. I knew he had other things to get to, but pretty cool to see him, and pretty neat to see Darius Rucker as well. We've been talking a little bit about the Spencer Rattler conversation from today's edition of the Garnet Trust Hour, which if you missed any of that, we'll have it up for you shortly on the 107.5 The Game podcasting page. Go out to Love Chevrolet phone lines right now. Barron wants to weigh in and pay a compliment to Spencer Rattler himself. Barron, what's on your mind this morning?
It could be information to change your life forever. Or the Something You Should Know podcast could just be something interesting.
Herb Cohen is one of the all-time legendary great sales trainers and negotiators. And he has some advice that will help you negotiate better. Make the other person feel superior and smarter than you. Care, but don't care too much. If you don't like the deal, walk away and see if the deal doesn't get better instantly.
Something You Should Know, wherever you listen.
I'll be real definite and quick, but I hope Mr. Rattler realizes just how much he's appreciated by the people of South Carolina, how many fans he has developed by coming here. It was a bright spot. You know, we got a much better team than our record shows, and because of him, a lot of it. You know, I'm from Georgia, but I'm visiting up there. I wore a South Carolina hat into the breakfast restaurant up there. Well, the waitress came by and said, "What's the last game?" And I want a hat. I said, "Take this one, it was new." I said, "I'll bring you some more next time I come." So I took a bunch of souvenirs up there. They got fans everywhere. They watch. Who else has kicked Georgia around 14-3 the first half, other than South Carolina? And they remember him. And anyway, I hope he realizes how much he's appreciated. And he's got famous all over the South. I'm talking about the mountain town of North Georgia, up in the hills. They watch South Carolina up there. A lot of people do. Anyway, thank you for letting me on, and we really appreciate Mr. Rattler. Good luck to him.
No, absolutely, Barron. I appreciate you calling in 803-404-6100, and I think he kind of nailed it there. I believe he is appreciated by not only a large portion of his fan base, but a lot of people around the SEC as well. And he was obviously a very big name when he did transfer over from Oklahoma. And as we've talked about plenty of times, he, maybe didn't have the best reputation in a lot of people's eyes going back to that Netflix show when he was 17-year-old kid and said some dumb things in front of a camera. But, when we can all attest to this, he's certainly matured a whole lot since then. And, again, has been very well embraced by not only the South Carolina contingent, but the SEC as a whole, it seems like.
Yeah, he really has. And like I said, has a shot to ease into the record books at South Carolina. I'm looking right now, even just in 2 seasons. So 4,000-yard passers list here, top 10 career passers list. Todd Ellis has nearly 10,000, which, you have to, the way they do it in the record book, Spencer is already has more career passing yards than anybody who has ever suited up
Yes.
at South Carolina. But I guess with transfers and sort of the new age of college football, you only do it with how many yards you have in that uniform. And so Spencer basically this past week slid into 9th place career passers at South Carolina. And he's got a pretty good shot. So with just a solid game this week, he will probably slide into 7th. And he would pass Phil Petty and Anthony Wright.
Couple good ones.
And so now probably doesn't go into 6th this week, but you never quite put it past Rattler. He'd need a 450 burger, which could happen.
Yeah, I mean, it is Vanderbilt.
It is Vanderbilt's defense. And
what is, as far as the pecking order on that list, okay, we'll get to that in a moment, but I would say an obtainable like number that he could potentially get to on that list.
I
as far
actually
as
do.
the
I do
rankings
already
go.
have that answer
You do
for
have
you.
that
I
answer?
just lost my screen
Okay.
for some reason. But basically, he probably, just glancing at it, would tap out at 5th.
Okay.
5th all time. He's got a very real shot at that. And I did have the numbers for y'all, but I just lost my screen.
Computer died.
And but Connor Shaw is 5th.
Okay.
So
yeah.
if he has basically his typical big games, the final 3, even without a bowl game,
Okay.
he can get to 5th. And then even if you tacked on a 4th game for whatever reason, it would be tough to get into 4th because there's a pretty big gap there.
But still, to be the number 5 potentially all-time leading passer in school history in just 25 games, it's pretty impressive.
And you're saying he would pass Connor Shaw to go into 5th?
Yes, Connor is 5th right now. So he would pass. He would take Connor's place as 5th. Connor has 6,074 career yards. You know who's 4th? Anybody?
4th.
No.
There's a big gap. This guy, you want to talk about how people are remembered? Not remembered well enough, in my opinion, for what he did.
Jeff Grants?
No.
What era are we talking here?
Talking recent.
Recent Dylan Thompson?
Mm-mm. Jake Bentley.
Oh, yeah. More recent, yeah.
Jake is 4th all time at South Carolina with 7,527 yards.
Now, that's one. You want to talk about guys that got, like, the treatment you were talking about earlier? Who, buddy?
But dude, I'm telling you, if you look at every single quarterback career ever,
Yeah.
there's, and people can't obviously see me, but there's like a, it's like a graph, and it starts going up. And for guys that just, maybe aren't good,
Sure.
the graph just drops on off, and people are just like, nope, next, give me the next guy. And for guys that are good, it kind of keeps going steadily up, or it kind of plateaus for a little while. And this graph is sort of showing fan sentiment on, do I want this guy to be my QB or not? And then eventually, just about every quarterback that's ever suited up, it eventually falls off. And hey, play the backup. We want to see this guy. We want to see that freshman that I read about on Gamecock Central. So Rattler has not really had to experience that fan sentiment graph. Jake Bentley, poor guy, absolutely did experience that.
Well, and speaking of backup quarterbacks here, obviously we all believe that Lenore Sellers is going to be that next guy for South Carolina. What is the, how much of a benefit is it for him to be able to sit behind a guy like Spencer this year, learn from him, develop under him? And obviously he's gotten out on the field a few times and gotten to play a little bit. But just being able to learn from somebody that's just played so much college football and has been in a highly successful program like Oklahoma, has obviously come here and done a lot of great things in South Carolina too. How beneficial is that for Lenore Sellers when he eventually takes over?
Very. And, Spencer's been a great teammate as well. And so I think Lenore's, he's a sharp kid. And so just being able to observe, all the different things that Spencer has done this year, how has he led the team? How does he, command the huddle, so to speak? The plays that he's made. Those things are very valuable. And I think that plus, here's something that's nice. Not having to come in and start as a freshman, right? Like if you're good enough and the need is there, sure, that we've seen that. We've seen successful instances of that in the past. But we've also seen, and man, it seems like we've seen it a good bit here at South Carolina, guys having to come in as freshmen. And, it's not that they're not ready. It's just not ideal. And it's the hardest position and the most important position to play on the field. And so have we all wanted to see Lenore Sellers more? Yeah, sure. But it's nice, actually, that he's not out there as the starter because you need him to be the starter. So just having that year to sit and be able to have the year of development as a quarterback, but also get a cup of coffee on the field. That's beneficial, I think.
Absolutely. And again, if you missed any of that conversation with Spencer Rattler in the Garden Trust Hour, we'll have it up for you shortly on the 107.5 The Game podcasting page. All this talk about football. Basketball got started yesterday in a big way for both the men and women. We'll talk about that. And one certain freshman that really showed out.
Half redneck, half posh. 100% fun. Trey Crowder and Corey Ryan Forrester try and learn fancy culture in putting on airs.
The host of the Medium Popcorn Podcast, Brandon Collins and Justin Brown.
Okay, so Paddington 2 had like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes for you.
You guys ruined that?
Justin came in and like took it down like 2 points because of his rating. That's the time we started getting death threats.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. People worship that movie.
Putting on airs. The podcast is on YouTube and wherever you listen.
Well, I was looking at her, and I was like ready for her to like take me, like guard me, but she was looking like she didn't know whether to guard me or guard the people who was running with me. So I was like, all right, this is the time to do it. So when I did it, I seen like the other defender coming up to like try to block it, so I had to do like a little fake to Camilla, and I laid it up. But that come with a lot of practice. Like I do that move like a lot in practice. So in the game time, it felt normal.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. That was the voice of true freshman for South Carolina women's basketball, Malaysia Fulwiley, who in and of itself had an already impressive performance with 17 points, 6 assists, and a rebound in yesterday's win over Notre Dame out there in Paris. But the thing everybody's talking about, the around-the-back layup she had early on in that game, and as Dawn Staley would go on to say, she's a generational talent and going to be a very special player for South Carolina for years to come.
She used the word normal. There's nothing normal about
normal for her
pulling off that. But that's my point. If that's normal for you, you're special. Like there's nothing normal about what we witnessed from her. And the crazy thing about it is Fulwiley was so good, so impressive, and so flashy that Camila Cardoso had, I believe, her best game ever.
Double-double.
20 points, 15 rebounds, 4 blocks in 24 minutes, and did everything I think that we all thought she could maybe do and be this year, and it got completely overshadowed. But I know Dawn Staley used the word gall, and that she had the gall to pull that off, to even attempt it. So I feel like every athlete that's played any sport kind of has some, like, there's this cutoff line of, oh, I'm willing to attempt this goofing off with my friends. I'm willing to attempt this in practice. But there's a cutoff between what you're willing to attempt in a game. And there's probably should be a cutoff for what you're willing to attempt on national TV in Paris.
Well, and that's the other thing, too. This isn't, no disrespect for these teams, Wofford or South Carolina State. This is the number 10 team in the country in Notre Dame, a team that made, I believe, the Sweet 16 last year. Like, this is a good program who they themselves have a very good freshman. Hannah Hidalgo had a great performance yesterday as well. Like, doing it against a top-of-the-line quality opponent in game number 1, that does take a lot of gall.
It does, man. And I think what that tells me, and just what she's saying there as well, that was not a spectacular move for her. That was something she's comfortable doing. It's spectacular to all of us. But
yeah, she doesn't deem it as risky. She knows she can do it.
She knows she can do it. She's comfortable doing it, which is just insane in its own right. So we're going to have a lot of fun watching this basketball team. It's a completely different basketball team, obviously, than last year, but I think the Gamecocks put everybody else on notice that this is not a rebuild in Columbia.
Yeah, we know Dawn Staley's teams are going to be loaded with talent, right? But I think everybody was wondering, how good can this team be? What's the ceiling? Because of all the talent they lost, right? You return a lot of really good players. You bring in some new players, whether it's a transfer, right, in Pow Pow, or if you or it's a freshman like Malaysia Fulwiley. And it's just been one game. But as y'all said, it's one game against really good competition. And I think it gave us a glimpse of how good this team could be. And I actually lean a lot on Chris Wellbaum, our colleague at Gamecock Central. He covers the women's basketball program here very, very closely. And in his piece, I think this morning or yesterday, it came out yesterday actually, sorry. He said this team reminds him of the 2019-2020 women's basketball program at South Carolina. That team was on track to probably win a national title. We don't know, right, because you look at what happened last season. But that was, of course, the year that they canceled the tournament altogether because of COVID. That team lost just one game to a ranked Indiana team at the Paradise Gym. Other than that, they were undefeated. You know, they steamrolled through the SEC tournament. They were rolling going in. And this team reminds him of that team because they can really score. I think the shooting is really good on this team. They just have so many different pieces.
And that would have been the first year of the freshie class, correct? 2019. Is that the year they came in?
I think that's right.
Yeah. So, and obviously ended up being the greatest class that South Carolina's ever seen. So certainly lofty expectations.
Sophomore year for freshies.
Sophomore year for freshies. So they would come in 18 then.
Yeah. Okay. I get confused by the 18, 19, 19, 20, 20.
Yeah.
You know,
it's all
the dash years.
It's all mixed up there.
I might be telling you completely wrong there,
But regardless, a ton of talent on that team, a part of that freshie class. So certainly lofty expectations to live up to. But, you know, for the first game, went out there and impressed, and, you know, a 29-point victory over a top 10 team over there in Paris, which is really cool. A great way to start the season. And as we know, they do this every year. They have a tough slate of non-conference games. Got Maryland coming up next, taking on a ranked North Carolina team, a top 5 Utah team, before obviously getting into the grind of SEC play once we turn the calendar over to the new year.
I've told this story before, and I said it on Twitter yesterday, but I was in the gym when Ivory Latta scored 70 in a game in high school, and I said there would never be another Ivory Latta. Nobody could ever surpass her. Fulwiley has been compared to Ivory Latta throughout her high school career, and I see the comparisons. Let me just say that. Like it, and that's very hard for me to say as somebody who graduated with Ivory, but man, I can't wait to see what this girl can do, because she kind of has everything in her toolbox, which is what I think is most impressive. So it's going to be fun to watch. You have a flashy point guard like this. You have Cardoso inside, and then all the pieces around them. A team that I think, Chris, you mentioned their shooting. They're going to be a better shooting team than they were last year, which I think is really what makes them dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, you look like the move that Fulwiley had, her announcing herself to the nation, the world. We all knew, you know, most people who follow college basketball and girls' high school basketball, like, they knew Malaysia Fulwiley. She's been on the radar since she was in, like, not even 8th grade, like 7th, I think. She's been on the radar for a long time, big-time recruit. But that kind of overshadowed the performance that some of the other players had. And you just look at, once again, the depth of this team, right? Like Sanaya Fagan started the exhibition. You go with Kitts this time. Kitts has made a big leap. Pau hit a couple threes. She can shoot. She can run the offense. You've still got Raven Johnson. There are just so many players that Dawn Staley can throw at opposing teams. And another thing that Chris Wellbaum, our colleague at Gamecock Central, pointed out was this team has so many weapons offensively that it almost helps their defense, because the other teams just feel like they have to score all the time to keep up. It's kind of a constant race. So you've got Cardoso obviously doing Cardoso things inside. You've got Kitts who can pass and score from her position. But then you've got, like you said, Wes, a lot of shooters on this team as well.
Great start of the season, 107-71 victory over Notre Dame. They'll be back in action stateside against Maryland coming up on Sunday at 1 o'clock. That game televised on ABC. Men's team also in action last night, getting their season started, and also had a pretty impressive victory. We'll talk about that coming up as the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, rolls on here on the game.
Yes. Just putting in time. He tells us after practice a lot, just to make sure you work on your game. So getting these open shots in our offense, where everybody's thinking and praying that, not really praying, but just believing that it's going to go in. So I believe that with this offense and with Coach Paris having that belief in us, that if we feel like it's an open shot, then we're going to have a chance to make it at a high rate.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the Game Tire. Wes and Chris along with you in the Herndon Chevrolet Studios. That was the voice of one of the new faces of South Carolina men's basketball, B.J. Mack, talking about how well South Carolina shot the three ball last night en route to their 82-53 victory. That's funny. The men and women's team both defeated their opponents by 29 points yesterday. That's really cool, but the team was 12 of 22 from beyond the arc, shooting 54% from three, which going back to last season, they were in the back half of the SEC when it came to shooting the three ball, and were to be hot in some games, cold in some other games. And, obviously it's a one-game sample size, but last night showing a really, really good effort when it comes to shooting some of the three balls.
B.J. Mack, another Garnet Trust.
That's right.
Radio veteran. We had what? You had Studi in here.
We had Studi. We had Mack.
Talon Cooper.
We had Talon Cooper.
We had Michi. Michi, not a newcomer,
been in here.
obviously. Michi has been here, though. We had Hayden Brown. He's obviously not on the team this year.
We'll count Hayden Brown for Stephen Clark. How about that?
There you go. But, yeah, I mean, I did. So I watched most of the game. I'll be honest with our audience. I didn't get to watch the entire game. I watched most of the game last night. I thought there were some good things. There was a building block presented by South Carolina yesterday. And I think, obviously, if you're this team, I don't think you wanted to start out playing, a top 10 team like the South Carolina women. It's just different. And so to start out against Upstate and kind of have a chance to gel together, I mean, most of the guys playing for you are newcomers or transfers, and you're still just trying to sort of get to know each other on the court and build that rapport. But my big takeaway was that this just has started to feel more like a Lamont Paris team and what you sort of envisioned him wanting it to be, kind of letting the ball fly, but it's going in the basket and having confidence and being able to shoot the three ball, and lots of different guys playing, lots of different guys shooting, and I think it's something they can build off of.
One thing that really stuck out to me last night, especially when they got into conference play last year, there was a hesitancy to be physical, it seemed like. And last night, and again, this is USC Upstate, so and no disrespect to them, but there seemed to be more of an emphasis on driving the lane, being really physical at the basket, and on defense as well, something, again, this team didn't do a whole lot of last year, and hopefully that's a promising sign for what we're going to see for the rest of the season.
Talon Cooper, 15 points. Michi Johnson, 15 points. B.J. Mack, 13 points. Miles Studi, 10 points. I think you got to like the spread as well. You got to like how the ball was spread around, how the points were spread around. Jacoby Wright, who I think is going to be a really big, really important, at least currently off the bench piece, but somebody who can start for you if needed. He chips in 9. Morris Ugasuk, who was going to redshirt when they initially landed him.
Yep.
And you can tell he's a freshman. I mean, he went the Jake Bentley early enrollee
right.
route. Smaller guy, right? Like is going to need that extra year of development in the weight room. But from the sounds of it, he comes in and they're just like, dude, you're too skilled not to play, too skilled not to help this team. There's a skill set there, guys. And then to add in the fact that Colin Murray-Boyles is not on the floor yet. And I think as a guy, everybody in that program, just from the little things I had heard coming into the season, they expect him to make an impact on this team. So I think for them, this was a solid start. Doesn't really tell us much about how they're going to match up when they face the better teams, but it is something to build off of.
Yeah, I agree with you. The spreading around, and look, again, let me say, one game, right? But we have certainly seen teams like USC Upstate come in here and put forth a very good showing. And we've seen South Carolina lose at home to teams like this in the past. And so a very just well-rounded performance, like from top to bottom. And we were talking about shooting when it comes to the women. This team, I think, has some juice in terms of shooting as well, right? They've got several guys. B.J. Mack can step out and hit the three. Talon Cooper showed that. Miles Studi is a bigger guy, can step out and hit it. And actually one reason that he left Vanderbilt, he wanted to be more involved in the offense. And so I think he's going to have the opportunity to do that here. And Michi Johnson, they've got several guys that can shoot it from outside, which I think is going to help this team a lot.
And mentioning Michi, and he's somebody that, last season was so either hot or cold. And I go back to last week against Wofford in the exhibition game. He was 0 for 8 shooting, comes out last night, puts together a good performance. 5-8 overall, 2 for 2 from on the arc. So, he still has a little bit of that hot and cold element to him, but it almost seemed like last night there wasn't as much pressure on him to go out there and have to put out the points like maybe we saw a couple times last season, because you do have this complement of other great talented guys around him now.
Yeah, it's a little bit more well-rounded team. I think we'll see how they match up once they get into SEC play. I think it's going to be fascinating to see kind of how it all gels together, but I think adding in Talon Cooper as somebody, you have multiple guys now who can handle the basketball. So that puts Michi in a spot where I think you can have him play point guard, you can have him play 2 guard, you can have both those guys sort of bouncing back and forth between the two. Like I said, you got Jacoby Wright coming off the bench as well. And, it just gives you a little bit more flexibility in how you use Michi. Like you said, maybe it takes the pressure off of him a little bit. But he, to me, is still the guy. When you face some of these better teams, you're going to need Michi to be the guy that goes off and gives you kind of that upside that you're going to need to beat some of these better teams. But it's going to be fun to watch these guys continue to come along. And, BJ Mack, a solid debut for him. I think he's going to be a huge part. Is he going to be a solid player? Is he going to be a great player? I think those are the things that are going to be the difference in what we see from them once conference play begins.
Absolutely. So a great start to the season for both the men and the women. As I mentioned earlier, the women back in action coming up on Sunday against number 14 Maryland. The men get back in action coming up on Friday night in the Hall of Fame series just up the road in Charlotte, as they will be taking on the Virginia Tech Hokies. Tip for that game is at 9:30 on Friday night. You can watch it on the ACC network. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Don't forget Coach Beamer's presser coming up, sponsored as always by P. Wine Pools and Spas at 1:30. We'll certainly react to that coming up on Wednesday's edition of the show. Coming up next, halftime show with myself and Terry Ford here on The Game.
Former Navy SEAL Sean Ryan shares real stories from real people from all walks of life on The Sean Ryan Show.
Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett.
Where do the majority of UAP sightings happen?
Yeah, military installations, but I couch that. If they're going to fly here and check something out, they're going to see where our best and brightest are, I would assume. They asked me about seeing any UFOs in Washington, D.C., and I said, no. I said, there's no intelligent life around here.
The Sean Ryan Show on YouTube or wherever you listen.